I'm Megan Wilson, 34 years old, and I never imagined a holiday party would be the moment everything came undone. I stepped into my parents' Denver home for the first time in 6 years, carrying a stack of beautifully wrapped gifts and a folder tucked deep in my handbag. They greeted me with forced smiles and 2 firm handshakes like I was a guest, not their daughter. The house looked the same from the outside, but I'd come back someone they didn't know. Not anymore behind the polished tree, and the scent of pine roast and cinnamon rolls was the truth. They'd buried for nearly 2 decades. What they didn't realize was that tonight I hadn't come to forgive. I came to show them what they'd stolen and what I'd built without them. Before I go any further, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I'd love to know how far stories like this can travel. And if you've ever had to go home just to prove you didn't need it, I was born and raised just outside Denver, the youngest of 3 and the only girl in a house that never ran out of praise for my brothers. Our parents believed in hard work and showing up and never letting the neighbors see the cracks. And on the outside, we looked picture perfect. My father, Gary, ran a local real estate company that had its good years and bad, and my mother, Donna, stayed home managing the house like a business holiday. Dinners came with seating charts and dress codes, and not once did she let us forget the family name meant something. In this town, growing up in that house taught me how to keep quiet when attention wasn't mine, and how to work twice as hard to earn a smile that came easily for the boys. Brandon, the oldest, was already the family legacy before he hit high school. Straight A's, varsity sports, a full ride to med school by the time I was 12. His acceptance letters were pinned to the fridge like trophies. Justin, the middle one, had charm. He started a lawn care business sophomore year, and our parents invested in it like he was launching a Fortune 500 company. Dad even printed out the first earnings sheet and framed it for the living room wall. No one ever asked me what I liked or what I wanted, but I loved numbers. I coded my first game on a school computer at 11 and won a regional math contest. The following year, I came home beaming, holding my certificate. Donna barely glanced at it while pulling a casserole from the oven. "That's nice, Megan. Now go wash up there." Were no celebrations for me, no encouragement, just silence, or worse, comparisons. I was told to be more like Brandon, more like Justin. They're focused, Megan. They have goals. No one noticed. I was already working harder than both of them just to feel seen. When I was 16, my grandmother passed away. The one person in our family who treated me like I mattered. She left me a trust fund for college, $100,000 a chance to finally step out of their shadow and into something of my own. But when the documents arrived, Mom and Dad sat me down and said the fund was far smaller than expected, just enough for a local school. Maybe a few books they promised to help. If I picked something practical, I believed them. What else could I do? I took out loans, picked up 3 part-time jobs, and went to Columbia. Anyway, scholarships helped, but not enough. I stocked shelves and waitressed at night, did homework during my break at the diner, and skipped every weekend event to survive. Brandon got a new car for getting into med school. Justin had business checks written without question, and I kept my head down. The debt stacked up. By the time I graduated, I owed $50,000, and not a single word of congratulations came from home. After college, I left Denver for Las Vegas, not for the lights, but for the distance. I found an entry-level job in tech. Then another, until I built something of my own. A fraud detection startup built from long hours and quiet rage. It took years, but I did it, and they never knew when my mother called out of the blue last fall, inviting me to Christmas dinner. She sounded too cheerful, too rehearsed. It had been years since they asked about me. Suddenly I was welcome again. I said yes because I wasn't coming home for family. I was coming home with a folder full of answers and a plan. I was 16 when Grandma passed. She'd always been a quiet force in my life, the kind of woman who didn't speak over people, but always noticed who was being left out. She taught me how to sew my first button and signed every birthday card with a little heart drawn under her name when her will was read. It came as a shock that she'd left me something set aside just for me. A trust fund for college, $100,000 tucked away since I was a child. I held that number in my mind like a golden ticket. The day the documents arrived, Donna called me into the living room, her tone unusually serious. Gary was already seated on the couch, flipping through the papers. They told me the fund wasn't what we thought it would. Mom said there were fees, taxes, reductions, something about estate mismanagement. Dad added that it came out to barely $20,000, maybe enough to help with community college, but not much more. He said they'd help if I chose something practical. I nodded. I didn't argue. I didn't know how. So I put my head down and applied for scholarships every hour. I wasn't studying, I was working. By the time Columbia offered me a partial ride in computer science, I was juggling shifts at a local diner, tutoring kids in algebra, and stocking shelves at a chain store on the weekends. The loans still came nearly $50,000 worth by the time I graduated, while Brandon walked through med school without a single bill in his name, and Justin grew his business with Dad's money and Mom's cheerleading. I didn't go home after graduation. I moved to Las Vegas, took the first tech job I could get, and kept moving forward. The hours were long. The apartment was small. I ate ramen for dinner and spent nights debugging lines of code that didn't want to work. I poured everything I had into a fraud detection app that started in my kitchen and slowly grew into something bigger than I ever expected when the acquisition closed and the numbers hit the news. I stayed quiet. People around me celebrated the deal. But I never told my family a thing. I donated a portion to causes I believed in, started the Wilson Foundation to help women who'd been financially exploited, and put the rest away. I thought maybe that was enough, but 2 years ago, I hired a financial advisor to help organize my accounts. I asked him to go back through everything, including the estate from Grandma's side, just to be thorough. It was supposed to be routine. Instead, it opened a door I hadn't realized was still there. His name was Martin Connolly, a quiet older man with a careful way of speaking. He flagged something odd in the paperwork from the trust fund. The original balance had indeed been $100,000 untouched by fees, no reductions, no mismanagement at all. The bank records showed a full withdrawal. Just weeks after Grandma passed, the funds had been moved directly into an account listed under Gary Wilson for education. Disbursement emails between my parents and the trustee confirmed it. Donna wrote, "Tell Megan it came out smaller." "She won't argue," Gary responded. "We're putting it where it'll do the most good. Brandon needs it more every page." Martin printed felt heavier than the last. The signatures matched. The statements were clear. They'd taken my trust fund and given it to my brother. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just sat there in the quiet hum of my office, staring at the stack of papers on my desk. Everything I had gone through, the jobs, the debt, the sleepless nights, it all came back in pieces. Every sacrifice I thought was just part of growing up was actually the result of a choice they made without telling me. Martin laid it out simply under Colorado law since I was a minor when the trust was created and they were named custodians. Their actions could constitute a breach of fiduciary duty. Depending on the court, it might even qualify as fraud. The evidence was strong, he said, and recent discovery meant I still had time to act if I wanted to. I thanked him and took the binder home. I didn't touch it for 2 days. Then I called Alex Carter, a litigation attorney I'd worked with during a fraud case at my company. We met at a cafe near the Strip where people talked loud enough to give us privacy. I handed him the folder and watched his face as he flipped through. By the time he reached the last page, he looked up and said, "This is more than strong. This is actionable." He offered to pull additional records, dig into the trustee communications, and start drafting potential claims within the week. He sent over a dossier organized by date by signature by account. The kind of thing that makes a judge take notice. I had everything I needed, and just like that, the plan began to take shape, not in anger, not in haste, but with precision and time. I didn't want to send an email or make a phone call. I wanted them to see it, feel it in real time the same way I had. So when Donna's voice came through my phone that fall with that overly cheerful invitation to Christmas dinner, I knew exactly what to say. "I'll be there," I told her. And I meant it. Not for the roast, not for the tree, not for forgiveness. I was coming back with documents, a name they hadn't heard in years, and the strength they never expected me to have. The week before Christmas, I flew into Denver just before sunset. The sky over the mountains was streaked in pink and gray, and the cold air hit me the moment I stepped off the plane. I picked up a rented black Mercedes from the lot outside the terminal, sleek, quiet, understated, but enough to be noticed. The drive took about an hour along the old highway. I knew by heart. Past neighborhoods trimmed in lights and yards with inflatable Santas and reindeer, their faces different than when I was a child, but the feeling was the same. My parents' house looked untouched from the outside, 2 stories stone siding, white pillars, and a porch still lined with the same rocking chairs. I remembered from high school. My brothers were already there. Brandon's silver Audi was parked out front beside Justin's pickup. Both dusted lightly with snow. I pulled in behind them, my coat folded neatly over the box of gifts, and the folder I'd gone over 100 times now sitting beneath it. I took one long breath before stepping out. The door opened before I could knock. Donna greeted me in a red dress hair, curled just right, her lipstick a little too bright. "Megan, you made it," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She stepped aside and I walked in, holding the packages in both arms. The scent of pine and baked ham filled the foyer, and garland wrapped every banister like it always had. Gary came around the corner, his tie loosened and hair thinner than I remembered. "Well, hey, kiddo. Good to see you," he said with a nod that barely passed for a greeting. I kept my voice light. "You too, Dad." He glanced at the car in the driveway and raised his eyebrows, but didn't say anything. Brandon and his wife, Angela, stood near the living room, their 2 girls, Kayla and Taylor, peeked from behind her legs. "Aunt Megan," Kayla called out. I smiled and waved back. "You look taller every time I see you," I said. Brandon offered a half hug and a quick, "How's Vegas?" while Angela complimented my coat. Justin came from the kitchen, holding a beer, and wrapped me in a side hug. "About time you showed up," he grinned. Aunt Pamela was there too louder than the rest, in a purple sweater with jingle bell earrings. She laughed as she hugged me. The prodigal daughter returns just in time for pie. I placed the gifts under the tree, all wrapped in silver paper with clean corners and simple tags. The room buzzed with voices, clinking glasses, and soft music, but the spotlight stayed on Brandon's new hospital promotion, and Justin's latest business deal dinner was served at the long table where Donna had laid out her best China roast turkey, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds. Everything looked perfect. The conversation swirled around me, but never toward me. At one point I tried to speak. "I've been working on a few big projects lately," I said. But Donna cut in before I could finish. "Angela, tell Megan about that charity event you hosted last month." The words faded before they even landed. I took a sip of water and nodded. During dessert, I stepped into the kitchen to refill my glass. Just beyond the pantry door, I heard their voices. "She's done well for herself, hasn't she?" Donna said in a whisper. "That car isn't cheap," Gary replied. "We could use a little help with the business, just enough to get through the first quarter. Maybe 50 grand? I stood still, one hand on the faucet, listening. The water ran unnoticed behind me. When I returned to the table, Donna smiled and placed her hand on my shoulder. "Ready for gifts?" she asked in a bright voice. Brandon and Justin looked relaxed. Angela tucked a napkin under Taylor's chin. The kids jumped from their seats and rushed toward the tree. The adults gathered in the living room again, cushions fluffed, wine glasses refreshed. I stayed back for a moment, then took a seat near the edge of the sofa, the folder still in my bag tucked beside me. Donna handed out packages with practiced flair. Kayla unwrapped a coding kit and squealed. Taylor hugged a pink stuffed unicorn. "Thank you, Aunt Megan," she shouted across the room. I smiled and nodded. "You're welcome, sweetheart. The adults took their turns. Brandon gave Gary a pair of leather gloves. Justin passed Angela a set of designer candles. Aunt Pamela handed out gift cards in small gold envelopes. Everyone thanked everyone else with nods and polite clapping. I waited quietly. The pile under the tree grew smaller. The lights from the fireplace flickered across the wrapping paper. As the last gift was opened, the room settled into a lull. Kayla glanced around and asked, "Where's Aunt Megan's present?" for a second. No one answered. Then Donna laughed, sharp and careless. "Oh, we forgot you," she said with a wave of her hand. Justin chuckled. "Guess you're hard to shop for." I felt every eye in the room turn toward me, expecting a reaction. Maybe a hurt smile or a quiet retreat. Instead, I stood up slowly, reached for my bag and said, "It's okay. I didn't forget you." I pulled out my phone, tapped a few buttons, and mirrored the screen to them. Television on cue a video began playing showing the exterior of my office building in Las Vegas glass walls and my company's name across the front. A montage followed meetings, boardrooms the moment we signed the acquisition deal, handshakes, press flashes, aerial shots of my condo looking out over the Strip. I looked around the room and spoke in a calm, even tone. "This is the company I started 6 years ago. A fraud detection firm built from the ground up. It sold last year for $650 million. No one moved." Brandon blinked. Angela set down her glass. Gary stared at the screen like it might change if he watched long enough. The final clip showed the Wilson Foundation headquarters, where we'd hosted our first grant ceremony. "We've helped more than 50 women recover from financial scams and start new businesses," I added, recognized by Karen magazine as one of the top new nonprofits of the year. Aunt Pamela leaned forward, hands folded tight. "Well, I'll be she," whispered. I let the silence hang for just a second longer, then reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. "But that's not my only gift tonight," I said, placing it on the table in front of Gary. "This is a legal complaint for breach of fiduciary duty and fraud." I said clearly, "You and Mom took $100,000 from my trust fund 18 years ago and used it for Brandon's tuition." The room dropped into stillness. Donna's smile vanished, her face pale. Gary looked down at the open folder, unable to speak. Brandon muttered, "I didn't know. I swear. I didn't know the details." Justin stayed silent, eyes fixed on the floor. Donna finally spoke. "Megan, please don't do this. Let's talk privately. You're blowing this out of proportion." I shook my head. "No more private talks." I stood straight, shoulders square, and added, "You laughed when you forgot me tonight. Now you can laugh at this." And then I turned and walked to the door. I didn't look back as I stepped out into the cold Denver night. The door shut behind me, cutting off the sound of voices raised in shock, disbelief, maybe even anger. The snow had started falling again, light flakes drifting onto the windshield of the Mercedes, the engine still warm from earlier. I climbed into the driver's seat, sat for a moment, hands still on the steering wheel, and took one steady breath. The lights from the house glowed behind me, soft and golden through the living room curtains. It could have been any family gathering from the outside, any ordinary holiday with laughter and pie and wrapping paper on the floor. But the folder I'd left on their coffee table had changed everything. Every name, date, and withdrawal listed in black and white was now theirs to explain. As I pulled out of the driveway, I saw Kayla's face in the window, just for a second before the curtain fell back into place. The road was quiet, the neighborhood still and lined with wreaths on every door. I drove toward the airport, letting the silence settle around me. The phone on. The passenger seat lit up, once then again. I didn't pick it up. By the time I reached the terminal, I sent one text to Alex, "File it tomorrow morning." January moved quickly after that. Once the courts reopened, Alex submitted the full complaint breach of fiduciary duty and fraud against Donna and Gary Wilson, supported by financial records, emails from the trustee, and sworn statements from our advisor. The legal team took over from there, sending notice and preparing for the first hearing. In civil court, we didn't hear much from their side, not directly. At least no calls, no apologies, just silence and paperwork delivered through the proper channels. Their attorney responded after 2 weeks asking for mediation. Alex declined in early March. The court issued its ruling. The judge reviewed the trust documents, examined the timeline, and read through the correspondence between my parents and the trustee. Everything was clear. A calculated misrepresentation to a minor beneficiary with full knowledge of its consequences. The verdict was in my favor. The court awarded the full amount of the original trust, $100,000, plus $50,000 in accrued interest and legal costs. The decision was final, binding and published without delay. A local paper picked up the story, a small column at first tucked into the business section, but the headline caught attention: prominent couple sued by daughter over trust fund theft. Within a week, neighbors knew. Extended family whispered, and clients from Gary's already struggling real estate firm began pulling out. The collapse came fast. Contracts were canceled one after another, listings pulled before closing dates, and within 2 months, the business shut its doors. Donna lost her seat on the neighborhood charity board, and invitations to community events stopped showing up in their mailbox. Brandon faced a review at the hospital. Nothing official, but enough to draw attention. Donors questioned his ethics, patients asked uncomfortable questions during check-ins, and his promotion was quietly rolled back to a prior title. He wasn't fired, but the shine around him dulled fast. Aunt Pamela called once in early spring, her voice calm but unsure. She didn't defend anyone. She only said, "I didn't know Megan. I really didn't know." I thanked her and wished her well, but I didn't offer more. Justin sent a text around the same time, short and vague. "Sorry about everything, didn't realize it was that deep. Hope, you're okay." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I blocked their numbers one by one. No more group texts, no voicemails, no holidays. I told Alex to forward anything related to the case straight to his office, not mine. Back in Las Vegas, I returned to the work that had always kept me grounded. We expanded the Foundation's programs, offering financial and legal assistance to 20 more women that spring, each with their own story of being misled, pushed aside, or stolen from. I didn't share my story with them. Not at first. I just made sure they had what they needed. The funds awarded from the case were transferred into the Foundation's legal defense arm, a new branch built to help others hold people accountable for financial misconduct. My home overlooking the Strip became a place of quiet evenings. Again, the rooftop deck caught the last light of day, and I often stood out there, coffee in hand, just watching the city move one evening near the end of April. I opened the file one last time, every page still crisp, corners, sharp signatures, clear. I didn't add to it or take anything out. I just closed it, slid it into a drawer, and locked it away. What they took from me years ago had been real: the money, the trust, the ease that could have shaped my path. But they couldn't take the part that mattered, the part I built on my own. A few days after the ruling, Alex sent over the final documents. Everything signed, sealed, and cleared the transfer. Hit my business account first, the principal amount, then the court awarded interest and legal reimbursement. The totals were exact: $150,000 wired clean, no delays, no appeals. I forwarded it straight to the Wilson Foundation with a short message to our finance lead: designate this for legal recovery grants. Within a week, the board had approved a new program built specifically for women seeking justice against financial abuse. We called it the Eleanor Initiative, named after my grandmother who'd started that trust all those years ago. It felt right throughout spring and into early summer. We reviewed over 100 applications. Most were small business owners or single mothers who'd been taken advantage of by landlords, business partners, or even relatives. They didn't want sympathy. They wanted options. The first woman we funded was a hairdresser in Tucson who had her shop stolen out from under her name by a silent partner. She couldn't afford to fight back on her own, but we gave her the legal team the paperwork, the filings she needed. Within 6 weeks, she'd taken back her business and had enough left to expand into a second location. I didn't tell her what the money had once been. I didn't explain why I cared so much. I just made sure she had what I hadn't. Back then, the office got quieter after hours. During those months, my staff left around 6, and I usually stayed behind for a while, not to work, just to sit. The Vegas lights always came on. The same way, one by one, from the Strip to the hills, and the glow through my office window felt almost like a heartbeat. Steady, patient. One evening in June, I walked past the conference room and stopped. The monitor was still on, left frozen on a paused video clip from a foundation spotlight. My name on the lower third, Megan Wilson, founder. I watched it for a moment, didn't move, just let the silence hang in the room. There was a time when I couldn't say my own name aloud without thinking of everything. It had cost me. The loans, the lies, the silence at dinner tables filled with praise for everyone else, but that weight didn't sit the same anymore. The lawsuit had done more than recover the trust. It had placed a line in the sand, drawn cleanly between what they'd taken and what they could no longer reach. I hadn't returned to Denver since Christmas. No trips, no follow-ups, no shared photos from cousins showing birthday cakes or backyard reunions. Every so often, I'd get a ping on my phone, a notification someone had tagged me in an old family picture from years back. Aunt Pamela once shared a photo from a barbecue in 1999. I was in the background holding a plate too small for the food on it, smiling at someone off camera. That version of me looked unsure, but hopeful. I let the tag sit for a while, then removed it quietly. The more distance I put between myself and them, the more room I had to grow without shadow, without correction, just clean air and space. In July, I flew to Chicago to speak at a Women in Tech panel. The keynote slot had gone to someone else, but I didn't mind. My part was focused on financial literacy and protective structures, especially for younger founders. During the Q&A, a college senior asked, "How do you know who to trust with money when it's family that let you down first?" I paused for just a second, looked out at the rows of faces in that packed auditorium and said, "You don't always know, but you learn to trust yourself and build systems that don't require blind faith afterward." 2 attendees waited by the door just to shake my hand. They didn't say much, just nodded, thanked me, then left. One of them slipped a card into my palm before walking away. I still have it tucked in my wallet. It says simply, "Thank you for saying it out loud." In the weeks that followed, I returned to Las Vegas, but not to slow down. We expanded the foundation again, bringing on 2 new attorneys and a full-time client services lead. Her name was Robin Page. She was a former prosecutor turned advocate who'd left the state's office after watching too many low-level fraud cases get buried beneath corporate litigation. Robin brought fire to our halls, the good kind. She made calls at 9 p.m. when clients panicked, reviewed contracts on weekends, and sat with survivors who had no idea where to start. One morning, she stopped by my office with a case file in her hand. "This one reminds me of yours," she said. "Parents signed as custodians, then drained the fund 3 months later. Girl didn't find out until she was 30. I nodded and asked her to take it. That afternoon, I walked out to the rooftop deck of the building, stood at the railing and looked down. The city moved like it always had. Constant, fast, unbothered. I stayed there for a while. No phone, no calls, no updates, just the wind and the hum of it all. They had stolen from me. Yes, but the courts had returned more than money. They'd returned my name to me, and with it the quiet strength I'd earned. The first clue came during a weekend audit with Martin when we were reviewing old files from the Foundation's initial funding period. He'd flagged a discrepancy in the timeline, one that didn't match what I'd always been told. These "Records from your grandmother's estate," he said, turning his monitor toward me. "They're dated 4 days before the official probate closed. Your parents submitted withdrawal requests before the legal transfer was even finalized." I leaned in, scanned the lines, saw the timestamps. Myself, that wasn't just bad paperwork. That was intention. He clicked through to a second screen revealing emails between Gary and the estate trustee, language that was vague but firm enough to raise questions. A line from Donna read, "She doesn't need to know the full value. Just say it. Got reduced in probate." Gary had replied, "We'll handle the explanation. They'd counted on me never asking the right questions, never having the means to hire someone who would. But I had. And the deeper Martin and Alex dug, the more detailed the picture became. The trust hadn't just been drained for Brandon's tuition. There were service payments made to an educational consulting firm on the East Coast, early deposits into Justin's business account, and a wire-marked property investment that aligned with a cabin they used for family vacations in Breckenridge. My name had been on every withdrawal authorization as the minor beneficiary, but they'd signed on my behalf claiming legal guardianship and financial stewardship under Colorado law. At the time, they had that authority, but not the right to deceive me about it. Alex filed for expanded documentation through discovery, and within weeks, we had access to a full ledger from the trustee's digital archive. It showed everything from the first conversation after Grandma's funeral to the final email confirming the account closure. The trustee himself, a man named Roger Bell, had been a longtime friend of Gary's from college. He'd retired 5 years earlier and now lived in New Mexico. We reached out for a deposition. He agreed in his recorded statement. Roger confirmed that Donna and Gary had insisted the trust wasn't meant to be disclosed in full. To me, said it would cause family friction if I knew how much was available. He hadn't questioned it at the time. But watching the documents now, he admitted regret. "I should have required full transparency," he said plainly. She was entitled to the truth. He also remembered one detail that hadn't been written down during a phone call in early January after Grandma's passing. Gary had told him to expedite the funds before Megan gets curious. Those were his exact words. It changed everything with that information. Alex added a fraud enhancement to our case and informed opposing counsel that we were prepared to move forward without settlement. They tried to schedule a closed-door mediation. Again, we declined by that point. The story had already broken in the local press after a blogger in Denver who tracked probate irregularities picked up on our case from the public docket. Headlines were quiet at first, then sharper as more details emerged. Neighbors started commenting under the news post. Things like, "Wasn't she the one they always said? Got into Columbia on a partial ride." And I remember the dad bragging about covering Brandon's tuition in full. I didn't respond to any of it. Didn't. Repost didn't correct them, just watched from a distance as the story moved on its own. By mid-June, several old family acquaintances had reached out not to reconnect, but to say they were shocked. A retired teacher from our high school sent a handwritten note to the foundation. It simply said, "You deserved more than what they gave you, and I'm glad the truth caught up." The letter came folded in half with no return address. I kept it in my desk drawer around the same time I received a message through the foundation's contact form. A woman named Lydia. She didn't leave a last name. She wrote, "Your case helped me realize I wasn't crazy. I thought I imagined the missing money from my mother's estate. Now I know what to ask for." Robin followed up and confirmed her documents matched a similar pattern. Custodians misrepresenting the full value to avoid inheritance. Claims we took, her case pro bono, and filed her first motion by the end of July. The ripple effect was real, but so was the silence from Donna and Gary. I hadn't heard a word from them since Christmas. No letters, no apologies, no attempts to explain. Aunt Pamela called once in early summer to let me know they were selling the house. Said Brandon had helped find them a smaller place closer to the mountains. "They won't talk about what happened," she said. "But everyone around them knows something changed." I thanked her for calling and asked her not to keep me in the loop going forward back at the foundation. We began holding monthly workshops for young adults inheriting trusts or managing estate assets. Not just how to protect themselves, but how to read contracts, how to check disbursement timelines, how to file for an audit if something felt off. We gave out printed binders with step-by-step guides titled Your Money, Your Name, and partnered with a local law school to offer legal literacy clinics at no cost to attendees. During one of those workshops, a young woman named Kara stayed after to ask a question. She looked no older than 24. Dressed in a pressed shirt and dark jeans, she pulled out a folder and said, "My dad told me the account was empty, but the statements say otherwise. Can you help me figure this out?" I asked Robin to take a look. She did and nodded. Kara looked back at me and said, "I didn't think I'd have the words to ask someone, but then I heard what you did." We sat together for 20 minutes while she explained her story. I listened, took notes, and handed her a card with our intake coordinator's number as she walked out. She turned and added, "They never thought I'd figure it out either." The court's ruling came in early March, clear, final, and without hesitation, Gary and Donna were ordered to repay the full trust amount plus interest and legal fees. They had 30 days to comply or risk garnishment, and a public lien on the property. Still listed in their name, they complied the money. Arrived through their attorney's office, bundled into a single wire sent directly to my legal account. Alex confirmed the funds had cleared, then forwarded the transaction receipt to me with a one-line message, "It's done." I stared at that email for a long time, not because of the number, but because of what it represented. I had walked into that house at Christmas with nothing but a folder and the weight of, 18 years of silence. Now I held something solid, and it wasn't just mine. The money went to the foundation right away, earmarked for long-term legal grants and educational workshops for beneficiaries under guardianship. We renamed the scholarship program the Grant Family Trust. In quiet irony, and published a report on the structural failings that allowed misrepresentation like this to go unchecked. The impact moved fast, not loud but steady. Women reached out through our intake system asking questions they'd never had words for a few. Said they'd followed the case through small local news blurbs or word of mouth at community centers in Phoenix, Omaha, Boise. We heard from people in towns I'd never visited who had lived versions of what I thought was mine alone. By June, we were working with 6 new clients, all of them women who'd trusted someone else to protect a legacy left in their name and watched that trust disappear through forged signatures, misrepresented balances, and reallocated funds. Each case brought a new kind of grief, not just for the money but for the time lost, the assumptions broken. Robin kept the team steady. Alex checked in from time to time but mostly stood back. Now that the case had closed, he said it was one of the cleanest fraud rulings he'd ever filed, not because of how it ended, but because of how precisely it had unfolded, every signature date, email, and transaction lined up like a straight path back to the first lie. My parents never responded publicly to the judgment. There were no statements, no apologies, no efforts to dispute the facts. They stayed silent, even as their social standing faded. Aunt Pamela later told me Gary stepped down from his real estate firm. Within a month, clients pulled listings, sponsors ended contracts. Donna withdrew from her volunteer boards and stopped hosting events. She kept a small circle, mostly neighbors who didn't ask questions. Brandon faced a formal ethics committee review at his hospital following the press coverage. No direct action was taken, but he was removed from a leadership track and placed under a monitoring period. His name no longer appeared in their annual report. Justin stayed quiet the longest. I didn't hear from him at all until midsummer, when a letter arrived at the foundation. No return address, no email inside, just a note on a torn page from an old ledger. I didn't stop them. I should have. I'm sorry I read it once, folded it twice, and left it in a drawer unopened. Since some days I wondered if they'd ever truly understood what they'd done, not just to my bank account, but to my sense of self. Not because I needed closure, but because I wanted to understand how you could look at your child and choose someone else's comfort over her future. I didn't need them to answer, but I did want them to feel the weight of having to explain it to each other. The foundation moved into a larger space, by fall just off Fremont Street. High ceilings and natural light. A community hall attached to the side where we held monthly roundtables and legal clinics. During one session, a woman named Elise spoke quietly into a mic in front of 20 other women and said, "I always believed I was just careless with my money until I realized someone else had been making decisions behind my back. No one interrupted her. No one told her to move on." She finished her story, then sat down in the third row and listened as others spoke after. When the session ended, she came up to thank me, shook my hand and said, "I heard about you from my cousin in Colorado Springs," she said. "You gave people like me permission to ask the hard questions. I didn't tell her what my family had done, didn't say what city it had happened in. I just smiled and thanked her for being there that night as I walked through the empty hall, locking up the side door. I glanced over the room one last time. Chairs pushed in. Tables cleared, the lights dimming on their own. I stood there a moment longer than usual, hands resting on the back of a chair. Hadn't started this for revenge, but somewhere along the line, justice had arrived and stayed. The first quiet morning after the court case closed, I stood out on the rooftop deck of my building. Coffee in one hand, the city stretching out below. It was just before 7, the kind of still moment Vegas rarely offers. The street below hadn't quite woken up yet, lights blinking to life in scattered windows, delivery trucks humming through narrow lanes. I stood there not thinking about the lawsuit or the headlines or the people who used to call me family. I just breathed. There was no sudden peace, no wave of forgiveness, no neat ending, waiting for me inside the walls of that courtroom. What I got instead was something steadier, something real. I got to tell the truth out loud with documents to back it up and silence that followed. Not because people didn't believe me, but because they finally did. I didn't rebuild my life to prove them wrong. I rebuilt it so I wouldn't have to carry them anymore. Not the stories they told, not the versions of me they invented to excuse what they did. I built something with my own name on the front door and my own hands at the wheel, and I did it knowing the cost. Sometimes when the foundation gets quiet between grant cycles or client calls, I walk the hall just to remind myself what we've made. Photos line the walls now, not of me, but of the women. We've helped women who started again after being written off. Women who read bank statements line by line and asked hard questions. No one wanted them to ask. Their stories aren't mine, but they're connected by something I understand down to the bone. Not just loss, but the need to be heard without interruption. I still haven't spoken to Donna or Gary, not since Christmas. No contact, no messages, no olive branch. I think they know by now there's nothing left to say. Brandon and Justin faded into the background too, not because I asked them to, but because that's what people do when the curtain drops and they no longer have a script. Aunt Pamela sends a holiday card now and then, just a name and a simple wish. She never mentions the past, and I don't ask her to. There's a framed copy of my grandmother's original trust letter in my office. Now we recovered it through the court record. Her signature still clear, her handwriting neat. She'd signed it 2 weeks before she passed, leaving a note at the bottom that simply read, "For Megan's education and independence." That last word stuck with me. Independence, not just from money or debt, but from the need to keep performing for people who never clapped. It took me years to understand that you can't make someone value you by becoming successful. Sometimes you have to let the success speak where your voice was ignored. If you're listening to this and wondering whether your pain counts, or whether it's too late to stand up for what was yours, I want you to hear me clearly. It is never too late to ask for answers. And if you have the truth, even in pieces, it is worth putting back together. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it reminded you of something in your own life, feel free to share or just sit with it in your own time. You're not alone, Not even close. And if you ever had to start over with nothing but a file folder and a quiet kind of determination, I hope you know by now you were never the broken one. You were always the brave one. Take care of yourself, and thanks for listening tonight.